Hello. So in the month of November, I read not just 4, not just 5, not just 6, but the 3 books. 3 books. Yeah, but you know what? It's not about the number of books that you read. It's about the quality over the quantity, right? And that's why I rated these books not just 4, not just 5, but 2 to 3 stars. Yeah, it was an average reading month, but nothing else is really new. Most of my months are pretty average, so we're just keeping in line with the brand. So the first book that I read is What the Woods Keep by Katya de Becerra. This is a young adult urban fantasy book that I rated 2 stars. It follows the story of a girl named Hayden who turns 18, and on her birthday she finds out that she has inherited her childhood home. But her childhood home, like every main character in an urban fantasy story, has many, many secrets. And a lot of them have to do with the disappearance of her mother when she walked into the woods and never came back 10 years ago, and some secrets about her father who recently went kind of crazy and started spouting nonsense about supernatural races. So she has like a lot of shit to unpack that she just compartmentalized in the back of her mind. But like every story, you can never keep your skeletons in the closet, and you have to confront your past and find out the truth about your family and what happened. And that's essentially what this book is about. So what did The Woods keep? Not my interest. I'll start with what I liked about it, which is just one thing. I liked that each chapter started with the main character telling some kind of explanation of theoretical physics and relating it to the events of the book. Actually, there was another thing that I liked, which was the emphasis of female friendship between the main character and her best friend, who were very different people. Like the main character is more of the down-to-earth, introverted, mousy type, while the best friend is more of like the flirty type, energetic, extroverted, etc. But there was never like any slut shaming or anything like that. They are still very good friends and they still look out for each other. So I appreciated that. Although, to be fair, I think that should be a given in a book anyway. Other than that, I found many parts of the book to be quite, I don't know, just boring. The characters were really forgettable and generic. The romance was especially forgettable and generic. The author was trying to do this thing where the main character's love interest is her childhood friend, but now that she's seeing him again, he is very cold and standoffish. It just seemed like a bad combination of 2 tropes where you have the childhood best friend that looks out for you, and then you have the cold, standoffish guy that doesn't want to have anything to do with you. And I don't think that those 2 tropes mixed well together. It just didn't make sense why he had such an attitude towards the main character, why he was so cold towards her, and why he would even care about her. I just didn't get it, and I don't think it was pulled off very well. What made me decide to rate this book 2 stars was realizing that I basically tried to speed read through the second half of the book as fast as possible just so that I could get it over with as quickly as possible. So that's pretty much an indicator that this book was not it for me. I'm gonna be honest, the only reason why I read this book is because a long time ago I made my library buy it, and then the library finally had it available for me. And I think the only reason why I requested the book was just because the cover was nice. And then the next book that I read is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is a sequel to her first book, Vicious, which follows the rivalry between Eli and Victor, who are 2 superheroes that are mortal enemies against each other. So just like What the Woods Keep, this book was also published this year, but I think the first one had been published 5 years ago. I saw that also Vengeful got selected as the top 2018 Goodreads Choice winner, which is cool. Get your coin, V.E. Schwab, get your coin. This is a continuation of their rivalry, but it also introduces 2 female characters to the cast. One of them has the power to turn things and people into sand, and then the other has the power to wear other people's identities. So I was quite excited to start this because admittedly, I didn't really care for Victor and Eli when I read about them, but I tend to be more biased for strong female characters. So I was much more interested in reading their story instead. When I read Vicious, I think about a month or 2 ago, I rated it 4 stars because ironically, even though I didn't care for Victor and Eli, I still appreciated the way that V.E. Schwab had conveyed the themes of the story and the gray morality between the characters. So I understood her intentions and her themes. Even though I didn't necessarily root for any of the characters, I still thought that ultimately it was fairly well executed and it was just a dark and dramatic and fun read. So that's why I rated it 4 stars. But then when I read Vengeful, I ended up rating this book 3 stars because it did not really focus on Victor and Eli that much, which I know is the most contradictory thing ever, but let me fucking explain. I have mixed feelings about this book because I feel like the first one had a very clear direction in conveying the themes with the 2 characters, Victor and Eli, and their rivalry. And then this one was just kind of muddled. We don't really get to see much of Victor and Eli's rivalry, and we don't really see their whole relationship being expanded that much. Not only was this timeline much more confusing to follow, I also didn't feel like it added anything new to the original story. It kind of expanded on Eli's background story, and you get to see like more of like his thinking and the way that he is, but ultimately it didn't add anything new. Like even if you were a fan of Vicious and you are a fan of Victor and Eli, I don't think that this added anything new. I think that you could have just lived on with your life, never having read this book, and it wouldn't have affected you that much. It just felt weird to me that the first book spent so much time focusing and building up this animosity between Victor and Eli. And then we don't really get to see much of that in the sequel. And I assume that the reason you're reading the sequel is because you really liked the way that their relationship was pulled off in the first book. And normally that wouldn't be a deal breaker for me because, again, I just don't care for men who are egomaniacs. I get enough of that in my real life. So thank you, next. I was intrigued by the 2 female characters that Schwab is introducing in this book. But ultimately, I was let down by their portrayal and their story arcs, or lack thereof. I think that the 2 characters, Marcella and June, had a lot of potential and a lot of intrigue to them. I was very excited to learn more about their background stories and more about their story arcs and how they would develop as characters. But by the time I read the ending of the book, I was left thinking, that's it. And upon reflection, I realized that these characters were just added to serve the plot. Since the rivalry between Victor and Eli is not the main element of the story anymore, I feel like Schwab needed a bigger antagonist, and so that's why she added Marcella. And then she also needed a character that would kind of possibly lead Sydney astray and add tension to the story, and that's why she added June. But it was clear to me that they were just plot devices rather than fully fleshed out characters. That just kind of bugged me because it seemed like I had been set up for more, and then I was like, oh, okay. At some point, she made a tweet that was saying that Vengeful is about men losing their power and women reclaiming it, but I don't really agree with that. Like, if you read the book from beginning to ending and you know what happens, it's like, did they though? Like, did they actually reclaim their power though? I don't know. Just because you have 2 female characters and they have superpowers doesn't make it a feminist story, in my opinion. And then something that I also thought about was the fact that this story has expanded its cast to be more than just Victor and Eli. The story also covers Sydney's story, Mitch's story, Stell, who, by the way, I don't give a fuck about Stell. Why were there so many chapters about him? I really don't care about that guy. And then the new characters like Marcella and June. And I think because we covered so many of the characters in the story, there seemed to be more of a focus on the quantity of the storylines going on rather than the quality of the character development. I found this book to be lacking in in-depth character exploration for any of these characters, and in the end, I feel like we only got to read the surface level characteristics of these people, and because of that, I think a lot of their motives were pretty flimsy, especially when it comes to June. Like, I don't understand what her motivations were other than just adding tension to the plot. Ultimately, that's why I rated it 3 stars, because I don't think the characters were developed as strongly, and I think that there was a lack of focus on what the themes of the book should be. And I think what would have made this book a lot stronger is if Victoria Schwab had just stepped away from the rivalry between Victor and Eli, because she kind of like half wrote it a little bit. Like, it was definitely there, but it was just like not the main focus. Instead of just trying to cover everything, I think she should have just focused on still having the story take place in this world, because you can do a lot with like superheroes and the EOs and all of this other system that she has established, but instead make this a new rivalry between Marcella and June. So that way there's like a clear focus on two main characters. There's still a rivalry to focus on, and there's still intriguing characters with gray moralities that you can explore more in depth. But I think if you try to expand it among several other characters, it makes the themes more muddled and it doesn't seem like there's a clear direction. I personally would have loved to read a book that just focused on Marcella and June, so that you could really see the background stories between those two characters, and you could really just enjoy two very strong, opinionated women just have at it against each other. The same way that you would enjoy watching Victor and Eli do that in the first book, and we didn't get to see that in the second book. So if you're not going to show that in the second book, you might as well just focus on a new rivalry. I don't know. That's just my thoughts. What do I know though? Either way, Victoria Schwab is getting her coin, and you know what? Good for her. Also, if you are interested, I made a playlist of music that kind of reminds me of Vengeful and Vicious and this series in general. So I will link that in my description if you are a fan of the series. When I read a book, I like listening for songs that remind me of the story and remind me of the characters, or just like the general mood of it. And so there were a lot of songs that reminded me of this series specifically. So I compiled them in a playlist. If you're interested in that kind of shit, go ahead and check it out. And then the last book that I read in November is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. So I started this book for the Grisha Longathon that I'm hosting with Kat from Paperback Dreams. I also made a reading vlog for it. This is the first book of the Grisha trilogy, written by Leigh Bardugo, who has also written my favorite book of all time, Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Before Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom were published, the Grisha trilogy had been published, and this takes place in the same world and was pretty much like the starter books that set up the whole universe. I initially skipped this because I heard mixed things about it, and I knew that if I started this series without starting Six of Crows first, I probably wouldn't have made it to Six of Crows. And my guess was right, because this book was like very generic. I rated it 3 stars, but I do want to be clear that I did enjoy reading this book, and I think it might have been a result of where I was at the time when I was reading it. I was in the middle of a really busy work trip where I was using the last of my brain cells to just do my job properly, and I had very, very long, exhausting days. And during those days, it was nice to just kind of turn off my brain with a book that had very, very simple writing. If you saw my vlog, then you know what I'm talking about. Like, my days were really long and exhausting, so it was nice to just let my brain take a break and just welcome a little escapism. So I did enjoy this book in like a guilty pleasure kind of way, but objectively speaking, it's just nothing special. The biggest character development in this book is Leigh Bardugo herself, because holy shit, she has improved so much since writing this trilogy compared to writing Six of Crows. This book is like a combination of many YA fantasy tropes that you can think of, just melded together. You have the main character who is the chosen one, and she finds out that she has powers, and she's like, oh my god, how can this be? I'm such like a plain ordinary girl. And then she has like a childhood best friend. They both mutually care for each other, but they're not going to say anything because they have no communication skills whatsoever. And then she meets the mysterious new male love interest. And I mean, do I need to go on? You know what the story is going to be like. So both the plot and the writing are very basic. The main character is also very basic. And also she's fucking stupid. Like, she makes so many stupid decisions in the book that are just there for the sake of like intensifying the plot. But it's like, girl, just use your fucking brain, please. Like, there's this one part where this older woman character warns her about another character. And instead of just listening to her advice or even just hearing what she has to say, she's just like, what? This old lady is so crazy. She's getting senile or something, whatever. If an older character warns you that another character is evil, you have to stop being a dumb bitch and you better listen. That's not even foreshadowing. It's literally just telling you the plot and you can't even fucking follow it. She just lacks so much common sense. And also, her motivations were just revolved around the other male characters. I definitely feel like when Leigh Bardugo wrote the story, she was like trying to find herself. She was trying to find her groove, and she started off with the base of using every trope you can think of and just like built from there. That being said, I still plan on reading the rest of the series, and that's probably because I love Six of Crows so much, and also because I'm hosting the Grisha Longathon. But I don't mind reading the rest of the series. It's like a break for my brain, like I said before. One thing I still need to develop an opinion on is one of the main characters in this book called the Darkling. This is a character where I feel like people either hate this character or they're so thirsty for him, and I have yet to form an opinion. I think when I first read him in the beginning, I was intrigued by his character, but by the time I read the ending, I don't know, I feel like his character can go one of two ways. He can go down the path of being a very multifaceted, nuanced character whose morals are very gray, where you might not agree with his actions, but you can understand his intentions and you might feel sympathy for him, or he can just become a huge trope. It can honestly go either way at this point. I do want to like him though, because I've seen so many people get thirsty for him, and I just want to join in on the fun. He's definitely not the kind of character that I would want to be with, but you know, sometimes it's just fun being thirsty and joining along with the bandwagon. If he turns out to be problematic though, I don't think I can sign up for that. I don't know what's gonna happen, so I'm just gonna have to read the second and third book to really find out. So yeah, those are the 3 books that I've read in the month of November. For December, I plan on finishing the rest of the Grisha trilogy, and I am gonna try to put in more effort to read nonfiction books as well, just to like balance things out a little bit. Thanks for watching, and see you later.
Don't you know you're just another heartbreaker? Don't you know you're just another heartbreaker? Just another heartbreaker, a heartbreaker, heartbreaker.